Okay. Good afternoon, good morning, Excellencies, colleagues. It is an honor, a pleasure, and an excitement for me to welcome you to UNIDIR's webinar on the launch of the Counter-Improvised Explosive Device Capability Maturity Model and a Self-Assessment Tool. In short, the C-IED tool. I want to first take this opportunity to acknowledge and recognize the wide geographic representation in this webinar. We know from the registration form, in fact, that we have a lot of member states from all subregions present in this webinar. We also know that United Nations entities, NGOs, and private sector is calling in on this call. So we are very excited to be able to launch this, let's say, practical tool, which is a product of our over 2-year investment of research in finding out how we can support states in conducting assessments, but also improving measures against the threat of IEDs. Before we get started, just a practical information from my side. As you may be familiar, and increasingly, we are conducting a lot of activities online, and online activities tend to have disruptions. This could be connectivity issues or other types of disruptions. This is somewhat normal. So when these things happen, we have our technical team on standby to walk us through this process. Should there be a large disruption where we need to reissue another link, this will be done so by the technical team. So please be rest assured that we are prepared for these type of technological challenges that we might face. We are also recording this webinar, and for your own awareness, this is for record-keeping purpose. We do not have plans at the moment to release this later, but we want you to be aware that it is being recorded for record-keeping purpose. Now, of course, to get started, it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Duan, our director from the Institute, to provide us with welcoming remarks. So, Dr. Duan, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much, everyone. And it's a pleasure to join you here today. The tool whose name I shall not mention, it feels like Voldemort, is very difficult. And you can assume that a group of military and mine action experts were involved in a tool with a name as long as that. But happily, I know that there's many military and mine action and arms control experts in the discussion. So with such a group of people, I know you'll be the first to come up with a good acronym for that, maybe a C-IED SAT or something. So great to have you here. And as Hima said, we do have this event virtual. We had hoped to have it in person, but the positive benefit of virtual is that we can engage with a broader set of people and participants from around the world. So welcome to all of you. So really just a little bit by way of background and the context perhaps of how we've started to work on this tool. I mean, I think the first point I want to make is that the scale of the IED problem is a truly global one. It is not a specific problem affecting only one or more particular sets of states or one or more particular regions of the world. In 2018 alone, IEDs events were recorded in over 50 countries. So that's really to give some sense of the scale of the IED threat. The second, I think, point that we really drove us in our thinking is the impact of IEDs, both in terms of their destruction. Again, between 2011 and 2017, IEDs were responsible for more than half of all global civilian deaths and injuries from explosive weapons. But in a way, they impact most heavily on civilians. We've seen in this same period of years, 2011 to 2018, more than 100,000 casualties and injuries reported from IEDs, and 80% of those are on civilians. So it's a massively destructive and a massively impactful tool. Obviously, when we think about IEDs, we tend to think about those countries and contexts which are very heavily affected, the top of which is Afghanistan, Pakistan, Somalia, Sri Lanka, and Syria. But increasingly, we see too the impact of IEDs in parts of the world such as West Africa, Burkina Faso, as well as North Africa, Libya, and then Nigeria and Mali. So this is a threat that continues to expand. And that really brings us to the third factor that shaped our thinking in this, which is the accessibility and the expansiveness of the IED threat is one that really merits us to think in new ways about how we're going to tackle it. Somebody said recently at a meeting that I was at that the IED threat is fundamentally a knowledge one, and a knowledge one that is easily moves across borders and across frontiers. So we see the sophistication, we see the design, we see the production capacities for IEDs continue to evolve. For everything from the components to deployment. And we see that it presents unique challenges to governments and how to respond. It requires consistent monitoring across a much wider scale of elements and a coordinated whole of government prevention strategy if it's that the threat is going to be successfully countered, prevented, or mitigated. So that was really the context that led us as UNIDIR to engage in Counter-IED work, and at the request of the General Assembly to develop what was called a voluntary self-assessment tool to assist states in identifying gaps and challenges in their national regulation and in their preparedness on IEDs. I want to give a note of appreciation to the government of France, who has really supported us throughout this effort from the initiation to coming today to develop this practical tool. Now, it's designed to assist states to self-assess, to figure out what gaps and what challenges states have in their national preparedness. And so really then to be a tool to help states define their own strategies for preventing and responding to IEDs. It's not dictating any particular approach or strategy. A key objective for us in developing the tool was that it would be accessible and easy to use. And we were very keen that the tool is voluntary and that there's no reporting requirements. We want to make it light and we want to make it as user-friendly as possible. In developing this tool, as Hema said, over a couple of years, it's been a genuinely collective international effort. We've received comments, advice, perspectives from a global network of stakeholders, from people on the ground dealing with IED threats to policymakers defining some of the legal frameworks to tackle them. We've had a number of 2 in-person expert review meetings. We've had, I think, inputs on the tool from over 70 experts as we tested and rolled it out in a pilot phase. And then, of course, we had 2 pilot tests in Yemen and in Spain to ensure that the tool really matches up with the realities of countering the threat posed by IEDs. So I now know I'm threatened on very dangerous ground when you start to single out anyone to thank. But I do want to really just say that we want to offer our extreme gratitude and appreciation for a couple of key people and actors in this process. First, France and Colombia, as the CCW co-coordinators on IEDs, have been with us throughout this effort, have really offered us incredible political, financial, technical, and expert support. We've had expert commentary from the government of Spain and their experts who've helped us test in the pilot. And the entire UN system are our brothers and sisters, and particularly UNMAS, with whom we continue to work closely, UNDP Yemen, with whom we tested in Yemen, and obviously our colleagues in ODA. So really very warm thanks to all of them and to all of you who commented. But I of course, do want to give a shout out to the conventional arms team of UNIDIR, who, as you know, bring with them an incredible amount of commitment and an incredible amount of energy, but also, most importantly, a field focused to their research, which is really about trying to have impact on the ground and working with partners. So in terms of this tool, maybe I'll just conclude by offering sort of, I think, 3 remarks that we would like to think about. The first is, from time to time, people ask us, you're a research institute, what are you developing on a tool like this? And what does this mean? But I think this is really the perfect example of how evidence-based research and collected lessons on best practices, what works, really helps us put in place operationally oriented tools to help states and other actors. And so it's about how knowledge links to action. And I think that's really something that a policy and impact oriented institute like UNIDIR is really has as our priority, with a view to saving lives and supporting states and communities in addressing their security needs and strengthening that security. So that's why we really see this as at the core of our work. We have one key message, which is please use the tool. Please reach out to us if you need technical advice in using it and deploying it. And please reach out to us if you have any suggestions as to how we can make it better as we go along. It's not a finished item, it's an ongoing living instrument. In terms of our steps over the next few months, we'll be focusing on facilitating awareness about the tool, encouraging uptake and use, which we hope you'll be among us to join, of the member states to use it, also our UN colleagues and partners. And I know there's some already expressions of interest amongst different actors, for which we're delighted and looking forward to support. As part of our efforts to outreach, we will be translating the tool in French and Spanish, and very much hope that that could be something that we could eventually see a day in more official languages of the UN. And then we will continue to monitor it as you, the operators, use it, see what works, see what's not, and how can we build that repository of best practices and knowledge as we go forward. So once again, it's really a great pleasure. It's nice to have something to celebrate in these challenging times. And I will hand over to Hima Shiatani, our Conventional Arms Program Lead, to coordinate and start with the panel. So thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you, Renata, very much for those words. And I myself will be the moderator for this event. As just to echo Renata's point, that certainly we have one sort of strong message about this tool, which is that the evolving threat of IEDs really require a preventative lens. It is not good enough to be a proactive measure. So here, we really place the emphasis on prevention and preparedness. And this is at the core of the design of this tool. I just wanted to re-emphasize this point from my side as a moderator. Now, to get started, I am really pleased, and it is our pleasure to be joined by an expert panel who will lead us through this event. And at this opportunity, I want to introduce the three panelists that we have together today. First is Ms. Diana Castillo from Colombia. Diana is a Colombian diplomat posted at the Permanent Mission of Colombia to the United Nations and other international organizations in Geneva, and she is in charge of the disarmament portfolio. Diana is a professional on government international relations with masters in national security and defense, government with a specialization in counterterrorism, and advanced studies in international and European studies and security. Diana is also, as mentioned by Renata, the co-coordinator on IEDs and under the group of experts in Amended Protocol 2 of the CCW. Our second panelist is Bob Seddon, who worked with us very closely as an expert to develop this tool. Bob has spent 27 years in the British Army in a variety of ammunition, explosive ordnance disposal, weapons intelligence and special projects and related policy departments. He commanded an EOD squadron in Great Britain and regular regiments in Northern Ireland and served on operational, operations all around the world. In his final military appointment, he was the Principal Ammunition Technical Officer, ATO, and the British Army's competent authority and inspector on IED disposal, weapons intelligence, and explosive safety. Finally, our third and final panelist is Gareth Collett. Gareth is from UNDP Yemen, and Gareth retired from the military service as a general in 2018, having served as the head of UK's bomb disposal profession. His final post prior to retirement was the Queen's senior political and military representative in Iraq during the defeat of Islamic State physical caliphate. Gareth is a world-leading subject matter expert on countering IEDs in both military and humanitarian context, having established the principle for its genesis in 2006. Gareth is currently the Chief Technical Advisor for countering IEDs in Yemen, assisting UNDP, the Office of the Special Envoy, and local security forces with capacity building initiatives and activities. So with this, we are ready to begin and are surrounded by this expert panel. Final point before we begin. We invite you, participants, to submit questions through the Q&A function. So for those who may not be familiar with this Zoom function, at the bottom of your screen, there is a function called Q&A. Throughout the event, you are most welcome to submit questions that you may have. This will not disrupt the panelists from speaking and continuing their presentation. When you do submit a question, however, we would like to encourage you to name yourself and your affiliation or your organization to which you represent, so that we can address those questions adequately. One last point here is that those questions can be submitted in English, Spanish, or French, as our panel members are able to respond to these languages adequately. So with this, I would like to now invite Ms. Castillo from Colombia to take the floor. Thank you so much, Diana. Over to you.
Thank you, Himayu. Sorry, there was a little bit of misunderstanding with the microphone. I want to thank you and thanks UNIDIR for this invitation. As mentioned, the improvised explosive devices are a growing threat, and their effect on civilian population is devastating. Used mainly by non-state armed groups, terrorist organizations, and criminal organizations, these devices impact several sectors of the daily life, and that is the reason they require a comprehensive response. The security, humanitarian, counterterrorism, and mine action perspectives should be included to obtain real results against this threat. And that is the reason multilateralism should be actively discussing this issue in a cooperative manner. Next slide, please. There is a variety of multilateral efforts to address the IEDs. These mechanisms and initiatives have a diverse nature. In no particular order of importance, I would like to make a brief recount of the tools generated in multilateral scenarios, mainly the General Assembly, the Security Council, international conventions, and many other initiatives with different levels of enforceability. Next, please. To start, allow me to mention the efforts made by the General Assembly, where there have been approved several resolutions related with this topic. The most direct one is the resolution on countering the threat posed by IEDs. The last one, approved in 2018, includes measures to encourage states to develop their own national policy against this threat, strengthen the management of their ammunition stockpiles, enhance international and regional cooperation, increase their prevention efforts, and to provide assistance to other states. Under the same framework, we can find the report of the Secretary General, which is submitted to reflect challenges related to countering the threat posed by these devices, as well as to highlight the existing efforts and initiatives carried out within and outside the UN system. This report also contains conclusions and recommendations that can be implemented by the states. Next, please. The Security Council has also made different resolutions and reports on country situations as children in armed conflict, protection of civilians in armed conflict, terrorism, landmines, explosive remnants of war, and peace operations. All of these condemn the use of improvised explosive devices in different situations, especially taking into account their catastrophic effects. There are also legally binding instruments that recall the multilateral commitment against the use of these devices. The first one is the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, particularly its amended protocol on prohibitions or restrictions on the use of mines, booby traps, and other devices. I will make an additional remark on this instrument a little bit later. The second one is the Convention on the Prohibition of the Use, Stockpiling, Production, and Transfer of Anti-Personnel Mines and their Destruction, which makes no distinction between an anti-personnel mine that has been manufactured and one that has been improvised. Hence, state parties affected by the latter type of anti-personnel mines must also address them as part of their overall implementation challenge under the convention. Next slide, please. Finally, there are several other initiatives that should be mentioned. However, considering the limited time that we have today, I just want to highlight some of them. In the more political side, if you prefer, we have the Secretary General's agenda for disarmament, securing our common future, which emphasizes the importance of strengthening the coordination and the fight against these devices to ensure a whole-of-system approach. If you prefer on the more technical side, we have tools like the International Mine Action Standards, or IMAS. In setting the standards for field operation worldwide, the IMAS framework promotes quality and efficiency in mine action, ensuring the confidence across the sector. The IMAS are used by affected countries as the basis for developing their national standards and by donors to ensure that their support is effectively delivered to those most in need, which guarantee that all actors engaged in the process have the same understanding and objectives. The last one that I will mention today is the UNIDIR Capability Maturity Model and Self-Assessment Tool, which gathers us today, well, after having witnessed the development of this tool, which I'm sure will help states to identify their needs and challenges for eventually strengthening their capacities against IEDs, I am convinced that this problem requires multilateral responses. The efforts made by UNIDIR in the development, as well as the experts gathered during this process, allow me to better understand the importance of strengthening the capacity of the states to prevent and respond to this threat. But this effort also requires the support of the whole international community, including affected and non-affected states, civil society, the UN, and other specialized organizations, in order to guarantee its sustainability. Before concluding this part of my remarks, I want to underline the existence of many other instruments and initiatives, which include efforts of assistance, information exchange, clearance, law enforcement, counterterrorism, diversion, research, which all play an important role in countering the improvised explosive devices. Next, please. At this point, I would like to talk a little bit more about the amended Protocol 2 group of experts, where we have a discussion on improvised explosive devices coordinated by France with Colombia. I will use this instrument to review some of the challenges and opportunities of the multilateral cooperation. This informal implementation mechanism was established by the 10th Annual Conference of the High Contract in Paris to amend the Protocol 2 in 2008 to share experiences on the scale of the humanitarian problem posed by IEDs and to learn about efforts to defeat and prevent the use of these devices at all the levels. Next, please. The best opportunities for strengthening the capabilities of the states under this framework are the general exchange of views through the meeting of experts, where we discuss about the current international situation, we share relevant developments in other fora, and we promote technical discussions on this subject. Other opportunity comes from the compilation of existing guidelines and best practices aiming at addressing the diversion or illicit use of materials that can eventually be used for making IEDs. Another one is the questionnaire on improvised explosive devices, which we are working to update this year. Both tools are available in the website of the convention, where you can consult them and send your inputs to strengthen them. The topics included in the mandate approved during the last meeting of High Contract in Paris to be discussed during the group of experts include new types of IEDs, components, methods of clearance, methods to protect civilians, and it's always open to include other topics. So it is important to mention that all these exchanges are voluntary for states, and this is one of the challenges I want to highlight. With all the work that several organizations, several instruments are doing, the biggest challenge for me is to streamline the information sharing and the flows of information, to guarantee that the experts are really the ones receiving it and using it. Experts should know all the scenarios, alternatives, and tools that they have available to be more effective in the fight against IEDs. Also, it is important for states to have clarity what is the level of threat that they are facing, the capacities they need to address it, because not all the states require a sophisticated system to prevent. However, we do need to know what are the good practices that we can apply when we need it. And I think understanding this has been a progress for the multilateral process. Now instruments like what we're launching today are a great option for states which need to understand where they are, where should they be, and what can they do to effectively guarantee and respond to the IED challenge. Next, please. Before concluding, and conscious of the short time we have available, I just want to mention the Colombian perspective, where we work to provide a comprehensive answer to this threat. The decision of the national government was to have all the competent institutions working together in an articulated way, taking advantage of the strengths of each entity working towards the same goal. The national efforts are coordinated by the Office of the High Commissioner for Peace, which is part of the Presidency of the Republic. Under this office, we created the Working Group for Comprehensive Action Against Mines, in charge of coordinating and supervising all activities in the national and local level, to guarantee that the strategic and the technical level are working with the same objectives. Next, please. This strategic level is shared by the Vice President who works with the High Commissioner for Peace, the Ministries of Foreign Affairs, Defense, Interior, and Health, as well as the National Attorney's Office, the military forces, the National Police, and representatives of non-governmental organizations, working with survivors of mines. This level coordinates the institutions and promote cooperation between the state, civil society, and the international community for clearance, mine risk education, and victim assistance. The mentioned entities should share information and knowledge to take decisions to effectively address the IED challenge. The strategic level receives input to different technical processes where the experts work together, coordinate their efforts, and promote better relations between the entities. With this objective, there are regular meetings with operation managers, directors of the mining organizations, a national working group on mine risk education, different groups that have a broad composition to guarantee a really comprehensive response to the IEDs. The effective articulations between the different entities of the state and the civil organization has provided important results to better understand the situation, the threat, and the capacities available, as well as to adapt and optimize the actions against this threat. Next, please. Thank you again for these invitations, and we hope that states really use this tool. The Colombian government has supported its development, and now we will be using it. Already, the Office of the High Commissioner for Peace, the Ministry of Defense, and the National Police have expressed their interest, and we will start coordinating the process soon. And also, with regard of the group of experts, if you have any doubts or considerations that can improve our work, as well as topics that should be addressed in future meetings, please do not hesitate to contact us. Thank you, Ina.
Thank you, Diana, and thank you for setting the scene perfectly. What I would like to do now is to talk in a little more detail about the background to the tool and how the tool can actually be used to assist states determining their level of counter-IED capability maturity. Now, firstly, I'd like to start with the next slide, please. This tool is designed first and foremost to assist individuals and organisations who are involved in the development of coherent national capabilities to deal with the ubiquitous threat posed by IEDs. But it is important to say that this is not solely the province of technical experts involved in rendering safe IEDs. This tool is aimed at all who have an interest in developing and enhancing counter-IED capabilities. It could also help donors assess the likely scale of contributions and the priority of work in enhancing national counter-IED capabilities. We use the term counter-IED here in its broadest possible context, and it includes all activities which a state may undertake to prevent and mitigate the use of IEDs by extremists. Next slide, please. The counter-IED capability maturity model draws on the same basic principles employed in other widely used capability maturity models. The counter-IED capability maturity model has been developed specifically to support UNIDIR's self-assessment tool, and the output from the tool is an indication of the state's current counter-IED capability maturity level. Now, the tool has been designed to be intuitive and simple to apply and provides a qualitative rather than a quantitative assessment of the state's current counter-IED maturity level. It is not really intended to act as a route map towards enhancing national counter-IED capabilities, but is instead designed to indicate areas where attention is required in order to enhance those national capabilities. It also gives an indication of the maximum level of maturity a state could probably achieve internally without external assistance being provided. In order to address this problem in a coherent fashion, we've divided the components of counter-IED capability into two broad categories. Upstream components are focused on those activities aimed at deterring or preventing IED events from taking place, whereas downstream activities are those associated with response to a particular IED event or mitigating an IED event should it occur. The premise, of course, is that the more effective the upstream components, the fewer attention is required to deal on the downstream side. Now, the counter-IED capability maturity model is based on a set of structured levels. These are designed to establish a baseline of capabilities across the prevention cycle. Critically, it is there to identify capability gaps and areas which need to be addressed. It is useful in providing a common language and a frame of reference for assessing maturity and progress. And also, it facilitates institutional learning at the national level and allows experience and lessons learned in one area to be documented and discussed over time. Next slide, please. So what is a capability maturity model? Well, it's a set of structured levels that describe how mature the practices and processes of an organisation is in order to produce a set of desired outcomes. It establishes a baseline of capabilities across the prevention cycle. As I've mentioned, it indicates critical capability gaps. It provides this common language and frame of reference. And again, it facilitates institutional learning. Next slide, please. The capability maturity model is based on 5 levels. Level 1, initial. At this level, the approach to countering IEDs within a state is probably not well defined. The process of countering IEDs is conducted by low-level units responding with little or no equipment, training, and probably not in accordance with a nationally defined policy. As we move up the capability maturity model hierarchy at level 3, the state has probably faced substantial IED threats for some time and has probably been engaged in a protracted campaign against extremists which have employed IEDs. It is likely at this stage that the state security apparatus has also sustained significant casualties and learned hard lessons on how to counter IEDs. At capability maturity level 5, at this stage, the state has a fully functioning apparatus which can deal with a complete range of IED threats. International cooperation is most often based on the exchange of mutually beneficial IED intelligence. And at this level, states are often in a position to give advice and assistance to other states who are at low levels of capability maturity. Next slide, please. A thorough understanding of the IED system really is a prerequisite to developing and evaluating the effectiveness of IED counter-proliferation measures. Now, one approach, and it is indicated on this slide, is to consider IED events as part of a wider system, and that for an IED attack to be undertaken, a number of linked activities need to take place. As I mentioned, we have developed the concept of upstream and downstream components of counter-IED capability to facilitate evaluation and also to aid understanding. So this slide shows the overall structure of the components of counter-IED capability, which we have reviewed and evaluated as part of this project. You will note that relatively few of the components are actually focused directly on the IED event itself. On the upstream side, other components such as policy, national legislation, regulations, particularly IED risk education, effective border controls, controls and IED precursors are all equally important. On the downstream components of counter-IED, again, it is insufficient just to focus on the initial IED response. It is very important to look at how IED scenes are exploited, how recovered evidence is analysed, our IEDs are technically evaluated, and critically, our perpetrators of IEDs are identified and put through a judicial process to prevent them committing further IED-based atrocities. Next slide. So using the tool, it's based on a multi-stakeholder approach to assessment, and it is best used with proponents from different disciplines. So we would not advise that this tool is solely used by the IED expert. It should be used by a cross-spectrum of those involved in the whole of government approach to dealing with IEDs. It assesses each capability component individually and provides assessment questions and guidance on assessing the individual capability maturity levels for each of the components of Counter-IED capability I've just identified. The self-assessment tool is based on the capability maturity model, and it's designed to provide a qualitative assessment of the current Counter-IED maturity level for that particular component of capability. The general premise of this model is that the greater the maturity and effectiveness of the upstream measures, the fewer downstream measures are required to counter the use of IEDs. Now, these results can be used by states to inform prioritisation in strategy, in capacity building, and as well as to facilitate international cooperation, assistance and information sharing. Next slide, please. The self-assessment tool itself is based on a fairly straightforward, simple macro-enabled Microsoft Excel application. Each component of capability has an individual tab, and there are questions and free text boxes on each of these tabs, which guide the user of the tool through each component of Counter-IED capability. The application provides the mechanism by which free text information can be acquired during the operational assessment, and that can aid in documenting the individual maturity levels at that time. Two separate summary tabs, one for upstream and downstream components of Counter-IED capability, display the consolidated results. Next slide, please. So this slide gives you an indication of the upstream Counter-IED capability maturity for the individual components of capability. On the left, you have a tabular representation of each of the individual components of capability, and on the right, you have a radar type plot which gives you a visual understanding of the maturity level for each of those components. And just by looking at this, you can see immediately that in some areas the state is very advanced. For example, level 5 in control IED precursors and intelligence-led operations. But in other areas, perhaps it requires further work. So national policy, regulations and legislation at only level 1, and IED risk education only at level 1. So this would indicate straight away that actually just by applying some resources to IED risk education, the state's overall approach to improving its Counter-IED capability could be increased. And that is all. Next slide, please.
Thank you so much, Diana, first, and Bob, for your presentations. Before I hand over next to Gareth, just to take stock so far or in the event of what was discussed. First, from Diana's side, thank you so much, of covering the multilateral instruments in detail, not only about the CCW, but also the General Assembly process, as well as the Security Council process. In terms of those instruments, you covered very well some of the policy frameworks that already exist, but some of the practical tools that are already available or becoming available, which is quite informative. I think, I took away one point, which was something I share with you, which is about the challenge to streamline this information exchange and making it available for practitioners and policymakers. I think this continues to be an ongoing effort amongst all member states in this regard. And thank you finally, Diana, for sharing with us the national experience in terms of coordination and how Colombia has approached this topic. Following this, Bob, thank you so much for a very clear overview of the tool itself. I think, from my side, I took away that this helps us, establish a clear baseline in terms of where the state is and where the states could go in terms of improving their capabilities. I think the key here that I took away as well was that it could be a tailored approach. That while we recognize that maturity can evolve and increase, it's not necessarily a linear process in that different components may sit at different levels of maturity. So that flexible, tailored approach is a key one in not only to understand your baseline, but also in engaging with external, let's say, assistance, what areas can be further strengthened. I also appreciated the emphasis on multi-stakeholder approach, that this is not just for the technical experts, but it should include assessment by policymakers. And finally, glad to see the data visualization component. This is quite exciting. So many thanks to both of you. And now moving to our final speaker, Gareth, thank you so much. And you now have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hima. If I could have my first slide, thank you. Excellencies and colleagues, it's a real honour to be asked to be part of this virtual launch today. I first intend to provide a scene setter explaining the threat in Yemen faced from IEDs last year. Next slide, please. 2019 witnessed an average of 83 IED events a month, and that affected civilians and military alike. And the effectiveness of one IED was 3 times that of an airstrike and twice that of a conventional mine. Successful detonations were indiscriminate, leading to 428 civilian casualties. And that effect wasn't just felt on land. At sea, 9 fishing vessels were sunk by improvised sea mines. And 4 main actors exploit the IED in Yemen, each with a favoured political, ideological or financial motivation. They operate on active front lines or within communities, highlighting the opaqueness of the security envelope, and where it is safe or not safe for humanitarian organisations to be operating. This has been a complex conundrum, but with the help of the security forces, we are able to map hot and cold areas being locations where legacy IEDs can be dealt with by mine action. This has allowed the National Mine Action Authority, who are referred to as YAMAC, the police and security forces, to respond within their capabilities. But please note that the YAMAC responds to approximately 73% of all IED incidents given capacity shortfalls in the police at community and district level. This leads to additional risk exposure and, to a degree, the high casualty rates experienced in previous years. Poor ammunition management also adds to the complexity of the problem, with military ordnance and initiators commonplace in the IEDs that are being used. Next slide, please. To paint a picture of the threat, the top left picture shows a 25 kilogram IED that was recovered to a storage area and subsequently detonated, leading to a 1,000 kilogram event. Top center and top right are a modified PMN mine, which has been attached to a radio controlled trigger designed to initiate a larger device. Bottom left, you have a simple pressure plate IED where the main filling is ammonium nitrate. Bottom center, you have a similar pressure plate IED, but in this instance, the main charge is thermobaric in nature and designed specifically to destroy structures. And bottom right, we have an improvised sea mine washed ashore. Next slide, please. So the Yemen Counter-IED project began in March of last year. An original concept inspired by the UNDP rule of law and mine action leadership, given the escalating threat posed by IEDs, their impact on the civilian population and sustainable development goals. The initial phase of the project was to establish a baseline of the threat and Yemen's ability to counter it. It's important to note that there was no model that existed at that time to hang a hat on. So this baseline was delivered in the form of a strategic study, which recommended a cross-government approach and the implementation of a number of must-do and should-do activities over the now 2-year and 7-year timeframes. The now, that's this year and next, was considered life-saving capacity building at best effort. Advocacy was also conducted through briefings to the UN General Assembly and high-level consultations. And given an elusive political settlement in Yemen, life-saving initiatives were implemented at community level in the form of IED threat mitigation, risk awareness training, and multi-agency incident response. A concept note was issued to donors in early February, and that focused on capacity building for the APII, but also the police, border force, coast guard, and criminal justice system. Initiatives that could be delivered over 2 years for around about $3 million. Now, the absence of a formal model to demonstrate Counter-IED maturity in a humanitarian context has always been problematic, most certainly in the operational theatres I've been involved in. And when you present a case to underpin funding requests, it's generally your own sort of ideas. So it's nice to have something that you can hang your hat on. It's therefore the appropriate time to state how useful the Yemeni authorities and UNDP found the UNIDIR model during its pilot earlier this year. The model provided external audit to the work we had previously completed, an important point, providing further evidence of the capacity building required, where it was required, and the associated costs. Next slide, please. But before we talk about the model, there have been challenges for us to consider. We've had to break down the language that sometimes clouds Counter-IED and IED threat mitigation, something we have been able to achieve in Yemen due to the versatility of a combined rule of law and mine action approach. We also had to identify measures of effectiveness that would be acceptable and which would provide tangible outputs linked to a theory of change. And you'll hear more about this later. Next slide, please. And as Bob said, here are the results of the UNIDIR pilot for Yemen. No surprise, we're at the lowest maturity level, but it isn't all bad news. If you recall Bob's comments, there are notes underneath all of these titles. And although there are low scores, they explain why those scores are low and how they might be remedied quickly. So some areas are better than others, and they don't require as much investment, which allows the Yemeni authorities to set realistic goals in those considered most important to them for immediate and longer term recovery. Next slide, please. And when I talk about Counter-IED language, this slide also summarises how the UNIDIR model helps the project distinguish between mine action and rule of law within the within the UN Global IED response cycle, where there is synergy between IED threat mitigation, that's the mine action bit, and Counter-IED, the borders of the UNDP flags are coloured green. Where there is no synergy, the borders are annotated red, depicting a sole governance and rule of law responsibility. Note that neither process supports the identification of perpetrators or intelligence-led operations. From this diagram, it is hoped that donors will better understand the distinction between that which is Counter-IED activity, that which is mine action, and where crossover provides a significant return on investment without compromise. Next slide, please. So what have we achieved with the help of the UNIDIR model? Well, we've delivered a draft national Counter-IED strategy, which the Special Envoy quotes as being an essential part of Yemen's future national security. This strengthens governance and restores confidence in the rule of law. The IED is listed within the ceasefire mechanism as an accountable weapon. We have completed a national standard for IEDD, which assists the national authority in maintaining humanitarian IED standards. And to underpin that standard, we've written SOPs for the AMAC and police, which are multi-agency friendly, link the security envelope to the appropriate responder, and differentiate the legal nuance between police and mine action exploitation. We have established a Yemen Mine Action Coordination Cell, which governs mine action process across governorates, and is the first step in linking mine action operations with ongoing security operations. We have completed training needs analysis, TNAs, to determine shortfalls against standards and deliver capacity building where it counts. The UNIDIR model has externally validated results and interrogated costs as we've gone along. Next slide, please. And does it work? The answer is yes, if you socialise the idea with the country in question, use a useful template such as the UNIDIR model, and identify locations that provide access. In Yemen's case, Hadramaut and Shabwa were identified, both having sustained high incidents of terrorist and criminal activity over a number of years, but with a favourable security envelope for UNDP to operate. Now, casualties in the AMAC the previous 2 years have been significant, with 1 casualty on average per 12 IED incidents attended. This had taken 4 full EOD teams offline, leading to longer response times, if any. Civilian casualties increased, humanitarian corridors slowed, and livelihoods were obviously affected, leading to further erosion in an already fragile rule of law. UNDP conducted the TNA with the UNIDIR model, identifying shortfalls in IED understanding, threat assessment and equipment within the YAMAC when conducting Render Safe. Given that it's also impossible for Yemen to complete mandatory EOD and IED courses anytime soon, the TNA identified key competencies that could be taught in the interim to save life. The course was established around these competencies, focusing on IED philosophy and principles, the types of IED most prevalent in Yemen, and the basic equipment and procedures necessary to dispose of them. Improvised disruptors were also taught, a very novel solution. And you can see from the above that we were pushing forwards capacity building in areas supported by our own capability planning and that of the UNIDIR model. So to put this into pictures, next slide please. These are the 25 brave souls that turned up for the training, and this is the equipment they turned up with. Next slide please. This is the IED disposal equipment that they had in their possession between all of them. Next slide please. This is the training that we delivered over a two-week period based on those competencies. Semi-remote, use of hook and line. Next slide please. This is an improvised bottle disruptor we taught them how to make and use, and in this instance used against an up and running IED that took one of the deminers by surprise. Next slide please. And this is the hook and line equipment that we provided as a result of the analysis. It cost no more than $200, was locally resourced, and much cheaper than the $3,000 commercial solution. I'm sure you'll agree. Next slide, please. So ultimately, it's all about providing knowledge, appropriate equipment, and separation from the bomb. There have been no casualties, and I say again, no casualties amongst the YAMAC since January, with 140 IEDs rendered safe in Hadramaut and Shabwa. Improvised disruptors have been used on the command-initiated device I showed you. A joint operation between the police and the YAMAC prevented a mass casualty event in the consumer market in Mukalla. And on the 13th of June, an improvised disruptor was used to destroy an IED placed by criminals to assassinate the governor of Hadramaut. UNDP has trained 25 individuals in IED good practice, and with appropriate funding, such training could be rolled out by NGOs for around about $10,000 for a two-week course for 25 students. All possible as a result of the analysis that has been conducted. And the price isn't eye-watering because our analysis supports what is needed, that which is stated and supported by UNIDIR, and provides locally resourced solutions. The concept's overseen by UNDP and managed by the newly established Coordination Centre, so it's a truly national solution. Next slide, please. And as far as outcomes are concerned, life and property have been saved in these governorates, with EOD team availability increasing from 50% to in excess of 90%. Attrition has all but disappeared, which will have a multiplier effect over time, further restoring confidence within communities. For example, humanitarian corridors have remained open for essential COVID-19 aid to be delivered. Effectiveness of IEDs reported in 2019 means that we can argue that we've saved at least 439 lives and livelihoods across those two governorates. This is difficult to determine economically. Some statistic would say on a value of a single life that this could be anything up to $800 million. But I like to look at this outcome as the lives of human beings saved, which have ranged from women and children through to prominent individuals, vital to a future peace in Yemen. Difficult to cost that, I'm sure you'll agree. The training proposals and operating principles now sit with the Ministry of Interior for considered rollout across 4 further governorates throughout this year and next. In that time frame, we will hopefully have achieved 50% of YAMAC trained to a reasonable standard in dealing with IEDs. And finally, the Yemen National Counter-IED Strategy, the overarching strategic document, provides reference to the UNIDIR model in order to provide further clarity to the government of Yemen on the most pressing issues to address within available budgets. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gareth, for your presentation and for such detail in terms of what activities are being done by UNDP in Yemen, in particular highlighting the impact, illustrating the various types of IEDs that are being observed, and how you've utilized the tool to help prioritization, but also to highlight how you could approach solutions. These are all very inspiring. So thank you very much, Gareth. for sharing these experiences. Now that we have covered all three speakers, we will now enter into a moderated discussion. And first, we have let's say an intervention from Miguel Ángel Fuentes from Spain. Miguel is a senior advisor in Spain's Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Non-Proliferation Disarmament Unit. Miguel so kindly helped facilitate and coordinate the collection of inputs from the government of Spain and the various stakeholders to the UNIDIR's piloting of the tool. So Miguel, thank you very much for being with us today, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let me begin by mentioning that it's a great honor and a privilege to participate today in the virtual launch of this excellent tool that will help for sure in the improvement of the international capacities to address this threat. As you may already know, my country has suffered during decades by the scourge of terrorism, and several people were killed or badly injured by the use of improvised explosive devices. But as it happens when you pass through difficult experiences in life, we learn. We learn about our own experience. We manage to improve our capacities and our expertise, and that is one of the reasons why we wanted to participate in the project when we had the chance, because we wanted to put our knowledge and our expertise at the service of the international community. According to our experience, the countering the threat posed by improvised explosive devices has many approaches. And that's why when we test the pilot project, we ask for the contribution to several partners from different departments relevant to this area, with excellent feedback for all of them. There was participation from customs administration, law enforcement agencies, and armed forces. After that, we consolidated all the comments, and we came back to UNIDIR with some ideas and some proposals that we hope it would help to develop the tool. And following the same idea of the different phases of this threat, we lead us to the conclusion that if we want to succeed in this fight, and there is a need of a comprehensive national plan that covers all relevant areas, and with effective coordination among all the relevant institutions, from trade control administration to intelligence, law enforcement agencies, and regulatory bodies. In this way, any state will have a robust mechanism in all lines of operation, and will be able to cooperate with regional and international partners. And the first step in the design and implementation of this plan should be, according to us, the having a proper image of our weaknesses and our strengths. And that is the main reason why this tool will be so useful, because it is precisely aimed to detect, to identify, to assess our strengths, and to identify in which areas there is a room for improvement. I would like to say that there is a key area that is very well covered in the tool, which is all capacities that are related to the disruption of the supply chain to manufacture IEDs. The assessment of these preventive capacities should be in the center of the efforts of any country interested in facing this threat. And finally, I just want to say, I just want to encourage all countries in using this tool and confirm our availability to contribute or to help UNIDIR in this area of work in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Miguel. First and foremost, to you and the government of Spain for all the support that you have provided to UNIDIR in the development of this tool. We greatly appreciate this. Thank you. Second, I take the key sort of echoing messages, Marta's stakeholder approach. the center of gravity being placed on the upstream measures to disrupting the supply chains. And also, I really sort of appreciated the idea of this being used to inform national action plans. This is something that we could potentially consider further under the guidance of member states, of course, in the use and the subsequent next steps of the tool itself. So thank you so much, Miguel, once again. It's been a pleasure to engage with you. So thank you so much. Now, we have a second speaker intervention from the floor, and this time it's from UNMAS, UN Mine Action Service, from Alex Riebel, who we have really benefited from close relationship and advisory support from the entire UN system. And Alex is an IED threat mitigation advisor for UNMAS. And again, Alex has provided invaluable support and guidance to UNIDIR in this process. So with this, a few words, Alex, please, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Himayu. And thank you very much to Bob and Gareth for the very good and understandable explanation of the tool and the model. I quickly want to mention 3 points. First, on development of the tool, on the cooperation, and also on the result and the way ahead. Personally, it was an honor for me to contribute to the development of the UNIDIR model and the self-assessment tool as part of this group, which had a high level of expertise and a very wide variety of members. Having been in this field in different missions myself and working with UN and non-UN organizations, supporting states and communities to find IED threat mitigation solutions and build a comprehensive counter-IED mechanism, it is now really a big step forward to launch and to have this tool at hand, which is a result of a very engaged and motivated group of experienced experts in this field. Secondly, on cooperation, as this is a tool for states and specifically for governments that encounter the deadly IED threat every day, it was really refreshing for me to see this huge interest and outstanding cooperation between the different UN entities, member states, but also other non-governmental organizations. I'm sure this cooperation will not end and with the launch of this tool today, but will continue during the use of the self-assessment tool and specifically to close gaps that will be identified without doubt and need to be addressed and closed. And last, for me, a result of this UNIDIR initiative, the developed counter-IED model was already used by the United Nations Task Force, currently working on the whole of system approach on improvised explosive devices, as already mentioned and shown by Gareth. This proves already at this early stage that the usefulness and wide applicability is very beneficial for all of the tool and the model. All the UNMAS field programs that are involved in supporting national authorities and missions in IED threat mitigation will use this tool and will benefit from it and from the clear and structured approach that is now available for all. I'm very optimistic, but personally also very curious to see the tool being used by states, but also to see the international community and the United Nations stepping up to help closing these identified gaps on the up and on the downstream side. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alex, to you and to entire UNMAS really for your support, but also for your leadership in the United Nations to help steer the coordination amongst the UN partners to address the threat of IEDs. Really, it's been a pleasure cooperating with you, and we look for further cooperation. At this stage, colleagues, I am mindful of the time, and we have a few more questions coming in from the floor. So we will now take the opportunity to respond to some of them in engaging with the panel members as well. At this stage, I would like to address a few together. And if we do not get to some of the questions from the floor due to time constraints, we apologize in advance. And we will make sure that we will follow up with you bilaterally to make sure that your questions are being answered. So I will address a few of the questions related to the tool, but in no particular order. First, 2 questions for you, Bob. One is from Alison from the UK. And the question is, have there been any consideration given to weighting systems in terms of the tool in particular areas, recognizing that some upstream measures may be also useful, or let's say may have a greater impact. So I think to simplify the question, is there a weighting system in this tool? That's the first question to you, Bob. The second question to you, Bob, is from Paul Grimsley, and his question is, and also to Gareth, how does this tool apply to the surge in IED events encounters in countries like Libya? How can it be used in countries like Libya? This is the second question that has come in. Now, there's another question for you, Bob, and of course, Diana, Gareth, you're most welcome to comment on this. It's a broad question to say, could you elaborate a little bit more about cost effectiveness on investing in upstream prevention versus downstream measures? Meaning, why focus on prevention? You know, what is the clear advantage there? These are the first few questions I would like to pose to the panelists. And may I perhaps invite you, Bob, first, next Diana, and then Gareth last. Thank you so much. So Bob, you have the floor first. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you, Ali and Paul, for the questions that you put out there. Ali, I'd like to just start by saying that it is a very good question, and we did consider actually weighting the individual components of Counter-IED capability as we develop the model. But the problem is, every IED campaign is different, and as the IED campaign progresses, the relative importance of the individual components of Counter-IED capability change. And in answering this question, I was also going to use Paul Grimsley's question in Libya to sort of make a point. If we look at the current situation in Libya, particularly in southern Tripoli, there are very many victim-operated IEDs, booby traps and anti-personnel mines currently in southern Tripoli that are causing horrendous casualties amongst the Libyan EAD teams and also civilian personnel. So if you look at the Libyan example as a case in point, and look at the components of Counter-IED capability, that to me would suggest actually the best investment that we could make at the moment would be on IED risk education, i.e. Educating the civilian population what to do should they encounter an IED, or critically how to avoid going into areas where IEDs are present. But also it places a prerequisite and an importance on developing the basic EAD skills for the Libyan EAD operators to deal safely with these devices. But you could contrast that with a state with more mature approaches to Counter-IED capability, and perhaps if we look at the situation that the UK faced in the 1990s and the early part of the 21st century, when it was dealing with a sophisticated terrorist organisation that was placing large vehicle-borne IEDs into city centres, that placed a much greater degree of emphasis on exploitation of scenes, exploitation of evidence, identification of perpetrators, and intelligence-led operations. So it is not straightforward to say that each component of IED capability could be weighted. It actually depends on the scenario and the state of the campaign at the time.
Thank you, Bob. Diana, over to you.
Thank you, Hima. Thank you for the question. It's a very hard question because the investments in the prevention side could be only perceived if they fail. People will see it if they have an attack, if they have an improvised device that affects them. So people might think that prevention failed. However, the effects on the other side, the impact of not investing in preventions are really hard to quantify. We will have fear, we will have disruption of economic activities, we will have displacement victims. So it's the amount of impact, if we do not do the right prevention, it's unmeasurable. So it is very hard because again, it will only be perceived as a success if nothing happens. So sometimes taxpayers don't see it as a success. But I think that the goal of all these efforts should be more prevention than responses.
Thank you so much, Diana, for this. And Gareth, lastly to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I suppose I'll answer those questions from Yemen's perspective, where the pilot was run. If we look at surge, Bob talked about Libya and the issues faced there. The model's already produced a set of results which tell you where your shortfalls are. The model's not something that's just done once. It's done as and when there is a requirement to do so. So if you have a surge issue, the model can be integrated once again, and that will identify where that critical shortfall is. And that therefore means you allocate resource to that critical shortfall. Obviously it's for the nation to decide how that is done, but you can pretty much guarantee that they may have to, move focus from one specific area to another just to address that surge issue. So I think from my perspective, the model just provide an iterative process to be able to do that. And if you look at the upstream and downstream measures, one of those is assessment of capabilities and threats. If you've got an upsurge in the loss of operators or whatever, you can look at that through the model and find out why that's the case. Has the type of IED changed? Has the situation changed? Has what we do been compromised? And from that, you can then put in measures to actually make it right. So I think there's a lot of proactivity with the model. It's something that you do on a regular basis just to make sure that what you are doing is correct, and then test and adjust accordingly. And I suppose in upstream prevention, if I use Yemen as example again, I would probably say that well over 90% of all the IEDs used have military ordnance and military initiators in them. If you did effective ammunition management, just one of those criteria, you would already reduce the items that are being used in those IEDs. Now it does force people to do other things, but again, if you're proactive on that side of the model, you can then identify how you can address a situation that arises when they move to precursors for HMEs, etc., etc. So from my perspective, the tool is a very, very simple visual model for people to look at. And if it's updated regularly, it provides a reasonably good solution to most of the issues that a state will face. I hope that's answered the questions that were raised. Over.
Thank you very much to all the panelists. I am very much mindful of the time, and I want to respect as much time as possible. We do have one more question from the industry, and this might be something that we capture as a multi-stakeholder. So Bob, if I may just volunteer you as a sort of the author behind some of these tool development. The industry actor is curious to see how they could play a role in this use of this tool, how they could engage with member states. If you have any views on that, that would be very useful.
Deborah, thank you very much for your question. And in short, there is a very important role that industry could make in addressing the sort of counter-IED problem. I see it in two real areas. The first area is helping to identify sources of commercial explosives, detonators and boosters that are being used in IEDs. So where our IEDs have been rendered safe and components have been exploited, analysed, it will be very useful for industry to help the law enforcement community identify perhaps which batches of explosives have gone where, and that helps on the upstream side of control to close down those sources of supply. In the longer term, though, there's perhaps another area that would be worth exploring, and that's the use of commercial explosives that are less prone to misuse in IEDs. Now, we see electric detonators, standard electric detonators, used very widely in IEDs across the world. But in many advanced states, actually, most commercial explosives now are using things like non-electric detonators. So if we can encourage the wider use of explosive accessories and particularly initiators that are less prone to misuse, that would go some way towards denying terrorists and extremists the ability to very easily manufacture IEDs. Over.
Thank you very much, Bob. I would now like to, with all of this, bring this webinar towards the close. Now, before I close, there were two additional questions, practical ones, relating to the tools availability. So I will address them from my side as a moderator. The first question was, when is this tool available? And to that, I'm very pleased to say this is now live. It's accessible on our website. The second question related to this is there a cost associated to the use of the tool? And the second answer to this is no, it's free. It's completely free. It is online, available on our website. And the third point I would add here is that it's currently available in English, but we will make this available in French and in Spanish by September this year. So it will facilitate the wide geographic application as well. I want to now move and talk a little bit as closing to bring this all together in terms of what it means for our next step. I think from my side, I would like to just express that we remain that we remain humble here, that we recognize that this is only the first step. We've only released the tool. The tool is voluntary in nature, so we are really encouraging all states and interested stakeholders to use the tool and provide us feedback as well. And when you use the tool and you are able to share some experiences where we can learn from each other, we strongly encourage that too, which can contribute to understanding good practices, but also lessons learned. So this is just a first step for us. And as we move forward, we remain available upon your request to engage with you in not only using the tool, but understanding the bigger picture as to how we are contributing to the prevention aspect of IEDs. Now, I also want to thank, at this stage, a few additional stakeholders that we did not mention before. And these include states really affected by IEDs. We have had close communication and to some extent requests as well to pilot the testing of this tool, which was not possible due to the COVID situation in early March. But these states who have supported us and provided feedback include the government of Afghanistan, Iraq, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, as well as Ghana. So I just want to also acknowledge that we are very much appreciative of your engagements and support in the development and delivery of this tool. And we really are looking ahead now in engaging with you as we move forward in the release of the tool. At this juncture, I want to take the opportunity really to thank each of the panelists, Gareth, Diana, Bob. Thank you so much for being with us and sharing your knowledge with us today. I want to also thank Miguel Angel and Alex for being together with us and giving us feedback in the process of this. I also want to take the opportunity in thanking the team. They are a little bit silent right now, but there is a key player, Alfredo, who has really steered us in this process. So credit goes to Alfredo and Roland, who is also hiding behind the scene at the moment, but making sure that this is running smoothly. So thank you to both and Bob for the entire team for making this happen. Now, at the end, I want to reiterate our sincere thanks to the co-coordinators, Colombia and France, and in particular, France for providing us financial support to make this happen. With this, I want to just conclude this meeting by saying thank you to all the participants. We know that there's a great difference in the time zones at the moment. We know from the registration that there's many people participating from different parts of the world. And I am sorry that we were only doing this in English, but as indicated, the tool will be available in multiple languages. So with this, I just want to say it is with your support and your engagement that this is possible. And we only look forward to more engagements and cooperation and collaboration to together address the threat of IEDs. So with this, thank you so much once again. And this concludes our webinar and the launch of this tool. The tool is available. We will follow up with you and share a link with you so that you can easily access this. So thank you so much and all the best. And please stay safe. Take care now. Bye.